Hi, this is Dr. John Grazel, and this is another of our synoptic videos that tries to raise issues for discussion on key concerns of international development. And today, quick focus on the whole question of employment and identity and why these two should be seen together to see what is the real crisis that we face and the ways we may have to approach it. There's no question that unemployment or underemployment is a massive problem in the world today. And your figures vary from 40, even as high as 50% of the population unemployed. Majority of that unemployed population being young people under the age of 30, and creating a crisis that is economic, social, and psychological, moral, and even spiritual. Now, the classic understanding is if you want jobs, you give people a good economy. Grow the economy and you will grow jobs. And a country like Korea that we discuss elsewhere is a classic example. And to grow an economy, you focus on getting education, you focus on getting the appropriate skills, you bring in technologies, you get investment capital, and then you create a free market system with good policies and good institutions, and when you put them all together, you get that magic formula, very often called, we discuss elsewhere, the Asian miracle, and people think it's going to work all the time. But it's not enough. Now, why is it not enough? Because one, obviously there are countries it's not working in, but two, there are two major structural changes that are occurring now that are bringing into question the sufficiency of that formula. One, technology itself. Literally, you have factories, steel factories, coal factories that used to employ 1,000 or more people that can now be run by 40 or less people. The ability to replace people with technology is exponentially increasing. The second thing is you have globalization, and that's creating a leveling effect. And so what's happening is that to the extent you do have jobs, the jobs are going where you have the skills and the education, and they're sort of leveling out around the world. So the total number of jobs may not be going down, but in countries that had high employment, jobs have been being lost to other countries. Now, as I said, what's the problem? The problem is generally seen as work and needing more work. But I put on the table that the problem is bigger than that. It's identity. It's really only since the Industrial Revolution that people lost in the West particularly, lost their identities in their communities and their status and gained it out of the work they did, particularly work for others. If you study most human societies, people are hunters, they're gatherers, they're fathers, they're mothers, they're kings, they're servants, they're priests, they're warriors in waiting, but they're not necessarily defined by their immediate paid job the way you are in modern industrial society. And therefore, what happens is that all those other possible identities get lost, and when you lose your job in the modern society, you generally lose your underlying identity as well. Now, as I said, what gives that identity? It can be your job, but it can be many other things. In fact, if you, in addition to social, religious, there's just spiritual and intellectual identity. If you want to think of it, just think of a true artist. An artist is probably the only person in the world who never loses their job. Even if they're Van Gogh and have never sold a picture, when they get up in the morning, they are still an artist. That's their identity, and that's what they do. But few people in the world today have that privilege. Now, what's the alternative in our world today if we don't have it? Well, one alternative, which happens under good economic policies, is you go out and try to correct it with good education and building good skills. But that doesn't always work. We have now many countries that have very well-educated populations who are unemployed because they don't have enough jobs. You create new sectors that are a little different. The not-for-profit sector is actually a major employer now in the world. It's actually an alternative sector for identity as well as for work. Then you get what is particularly disturbing, but not that new. radical membership groups. People begin to join groups that give them other identities that are more important than the identity around work. And today, the terrorist groups today are not necessarily that different than many other types of radical and what you might call secret societies and other groups that have existed over and over again through history and been a source of identity, particularly for alienated people. Then you call up what the word entrepreneurship. And that's the idea that if you give people a certain mindset, they will sort of create the jobs and solve the problem. And the reality is only a small sector of people are entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurship is a state of mind that exists across sectors, not only in the private sector. And then we have the question of informal ways we deal with it. And this is particularly when we take institutions like education in developing countries and pack it with 10,000 students who are basically warehoused in dormitories because there's nowhere else to put them. Where we have millions in prisons who are really high school dropouts who don't have work to do or better things to do with their lives. Where we actually have growing groups of security personnel who basically stand around because that's the best job they can do in a decaying situation. And even worse, we have informal gangs and cliques and a whole criminal sector throughout the world that is becoming an alternative positioning for those who have no other positive identity. The bottom line is conventional wisdom about policy, skills, investment, technology is all true, but it's not sufficient to address the problems we have today. The problems we have today require us gathering literally on a global level and rethinking the basic question: who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? We have to rethink, and we have to think of it in a age of global economy as a global community. Now, if we do that, what I think we will begin to discover is that we will be able to begin to move from the simplistic identity of the Industrial Revolution, that jobs equal work within a industrial capitalist economy, to the idea that the meaning of life is embedded in what we do in life, and particularly what we do in service to others. If we do that, we can begin to reframe not only who we understand ourselves to be, but the basic roles that we see today as jobs, but which really are larger roles that are not only economic, but social, intellectual, spiritual. We have to get back to the idea that a doctor is not just somebody you go to pay to give you a prescription or cure. It's the role of the healer. The lawyer is not just somebody you go and pay to do a particular job for you and writing the paper or defending you. That should be the gathering place of those who seek to provide justice. Education is not just helping you pass a grade and getting a license. And education is the teacher who puts into you the fire of desire and curiosity for a perpetual search for greater understanding. And the politician themselves has to change as a role, which is not just a person who particularly is there to help manipulate the balance of power within the society, but return to the understanding that every society needs its leaders who, based upon their capacities, their wisdoms, and their commitment to the greater good, are given the responsibility of being its leading guiding lights. If we put those together and we look at them, I think what we will find is that we will be able to recast the world in terms of understanding who we are, giving the identities that people so crave, turning those identities into productive activities, and in many cases, rethinking this whole question of employment and changing it to service, and from service to meaning, and from meaning to the establishment of what we really need, which is a world of mutual prosperity for all.